It is difficult to imagine the Philippine educational landscape without the private schools. The private schools help the state fulfill its mandate of making quality education accessible to all Filipinos. It is in recognition of this role that the Fund for Assistance to Private Education, a permanent trust fund for private education, was established through Executive Order 156 on November 5, 1968. The Private Education Assistance Committee, or the PEAC, was created as the trustee of the fund. The PEAC is composed of the Secretary of Education as the ex officio chair and a representative each from the National Economic Development Authority, Catholic Educational Association of the Philippines, Philippine Association of Colleges and Universities, and Association of Christian Schools, Colleges, and Universities. For the development of private education, the PEAC takes on the role of funder, advocate, partner, and enabler. A national secretariat headed by an executive director executes the policies, programs, and initiatives of the PEAC for private education. In 1989, a landmark piece of legislation, RA 6728, or the Government Assistance to Students and Teachers in Private Education, or GASPE, was passed. The GASPE Act, which was amended by RA 8545 in 1998, institutionalized government assistance to private education in the country. The Educational Service Contracting, or ESC, Teacher Salary Subsidy, or TSS, Senior High School Voucher Program, the In-Service Training, or INSET, and Research are part of the Department of Education's GASPE program. The PEAC implements the GASPE program given the track record of the PEAC in program management. The PEAC has been involved in the development of the ESC, from piloting a scheme, which was a precursor to the ESC in 1982 to 1986, to implementing the ESC in 1986 to 1991, and from 1996 up to the present. The ESC today has close to 1 million beneficiaries. Part Part of the PEAC infrastructure for the GASPE program is the Regional Secretariat. The PEAC-RS is headed by the Regional Program Director, who designates a Regional Program Coordinator for the day-to-day program implementation in the region. The PEAC has the following responsibilities in the GASPE program: orientation, ESC certification, SHS voucher applications, processing, monitoring, resolving cases of schools with adverse findings, regular meetings and consultations with stakeholders, research and data gathering, in-service training. The PEAC is also accredited as a local continuing professional development or CPD provider by the Professional Regulation Commission or PRC. Participants of the INSET programs offered by the PEAC have the opportunity to earn the required CPD units for the renewal of their professional licenses. From 2012 to 2017, the PEAC trained a total of more than 70,000 junior high school teachers, and since 2016, an estimated 17,000 SHS teachers. The PEAC also implements its own programs of assistance. The Assistance to Programs and Initiatives to Reform Education, or ASPIRE, gave funding support in the amount of $33.7 million to 99 projects of private educational associations since 2015 to 2016. The Research for School Improvement Towards Excellence has assisted 79 private school administrators and teachers writing their theses and dissertation since 2015 to 2016. The Dissemination Assistance to Research and Education, or DARE, has supported 16 faculty members who presented their papers in international conferences abroad since it was launched in 2016 to 2017. The Philippine Education Research Journal is an online resource for decision makers, policymakers, and practitioners in education. Its editorial board consists of highly respected educators and researchers. The Philippine Education Conference is an opportunity for school administrators and teachers to learn from educational leaders and experts here and abroad, as they discuss educational issues, concerns, trends, and innovations. Recognizing the inherent strengths of the private schools in achieving excellence in Philippine education, the PEAC is committed to promoting private education as an integral part of our educational system.
Magandang umaga po muli sa inyong lahat. From the Private Education Assistance Committee, this is Doris Ferrer, Executive Director of PEAC. Yesterday, we started LIDER, PEAC's Educational Leadership Series. Leadership, innovation, dynamism, educational reforms. Big words, big ideas, but essentials to ensure that schools not only survive, but thrive amidst the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity of the environment. LIDER is designed to unsettle and disturb, move and compel, awaken and inspire all of us. 2 sessions down, and both really valuable sessions. Dr. Ray Vea on future-proofing schools and Sister Marisa Viri, RVM, on uncompromising quality. So now we move to the third. Years back, I read Maxwell's "There's no such thing as business ethics, because only a single standard should be applied, the golden rule." I am reminded of that rather tangentially, because you might say that there's no such thing as fiscal discipline, because there's only one big word, discipline. This might be true, because discipline is discipline is discipline. And discipline for school leaders is crucial to ensure commitment to high performance in difficult situations. And the next thing I'd say is really rather difficult, to have the discipline to hold back in good times. But for this session, we want to focus on fiscal discipline, especially in the time of COVID-19. While there are many areas in the education framework that needs urgent reimagining, For this session, we focus on school finances and fiscal discipline. This session will cover essential areas in fiscal discipline that may be helpful in ensuring survival, sustainability, and growth in the present milieu. Because, put succinctly, no money, no mission. So to lead us in this session, may I introduce Father John Christian Yu Yang, who earned his bachelor's degree in zoology at UP Diliman and Bachelor of Sacred Theology at the Ateneo de Manila University. You can see him now on screen, right, wearing his PEAC shirt. His graduate studies include philosophical studies and MA in pastoral ministry at the Ateneo de Manila University, and he completed his licentiate in missiology and doctorate in missiology at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, Italy. He was ordained a priest in 1994, some 25 years ago. Currently, he is the president of Father Saturnino Orios University in Butuan City. He re-engineered the financial system and organization of the then Orios College, leading to financial sustainability and growth. He provided leadership, which led to Orios College being granted university status within 2 years of assuming the presidency. He led and managed the planning, construction, and completion of the state-of-the-art 3.5-hectare Archbishop Carmelo Morelos campus of FSUU within a 2-year time frame and in a cost-efficient manner. The campus, which houses the basic education unit, has become a landmark in Butuan City. He also led and managed the planning, construction, and completion of the FSUU CBE complex, which incorporated commercial spaces to ensure the financial stability and growth of the university and position it strategically for the post-K-12 transition. He put in place a fully funded actuarial study-based retirement trust for all faculty and staff of the university within 1 year of becoming president. He did a lot of things in his first 2 years, and now he's president for the last, 15 years, 18 years. Father Young, together with the management team, ensured the continued improvement of the quality and standards of the offerings and programs of the university, the upgrading of the educational environment and physical facilities, and the introduction and delivery of new degree programs, which led to a sustained growth over the past years. At present, he's a member of the Commission on Higher Education's Technical Working Group on K-12 Transition Scholarship Program, a member of the board of PAASCO, of PERAA, of the Foundation for the Philippine Environment, FPE, and of course, the regional program director of the PEAC for Caraga. He also completed an executive course on transforming higher education leaders through effective policy reforms at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy of the National University of Singapore. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce to all of you, my dear friends, a dear friend, about my age but forever young, Father John Christian Yu Yang.
Thank you very much, Doris. Good morning, everyone. We have, I understand, viewers from all over the Philippines. I'm very privileged to be invited to lead in this webinar on fiscal discipline in the time of COVID. First, a disclaimer. The title was not mine. Doris thought of the title. And it reminds me of the book Love in the Time of Cholera. but today we'll be speaking not about love during a pandemic, but about fiscal discipline. I will now share my screen. Fiscal discipline at the time of COVID-19. As you probably noticed when Doris read my formal education, I have no formal training in finance nor in accounting. So my sharing will be based on my now 17 years of experience as president, with a very keen interest among many things in the operations of the school and in the strategic directions of the school in our financial status. So this webinar, I would like to think, would not be very technical in terms of financial concepts, but it would be more practical and hopefully would be more applicable to the situation of the vast majority of the schools that PEAC serves. The mission schools, the schools in the regions. And so it is my hope to be able to share our experience mainly here at Father Saturnino Urios University, and perhaps to point at some directions which could help our schools become more stable, to grow, not just to survive, but to grow in the midst of this situation. This is the course description which was read by Doris earlier. It is focused on fiscal discipline. Of course, we know that the COVID-19 pandemic caused a major disruption in our school operations. We have laid down plans. Some of us may have been well on our way to achieve our milestones, and then COVID happened. So there are many things that we need to rethink, many things that we need to reimagine, so to say. But this webinar will focus on the fiscal side of things. For we know that without money, without finance, it would be very difficult to achieve our mission. First, strategic drift. What I will do is present certain concepts which are, I think, helpful in making us respond financially to the pandemic. So strategic drift, it is, well, last year it was my one of my favorite concepts I was sharing just last October. Shared this with our own board during our ongoing education for our own board of trustees. And this is a concept which I think is not new, but very helpful for us. So what is strategic drift put simply? If you look at this blue line, this is the change in the environment. And strategic drift refers to the efforts, and the purple line, it refers to the efforts of an institution or organization to adjust to the change in the environment. What do we adjust? Our strategic plans, our approaches. So in the normal course of things, as the environment changes, we also try to adjust our strategic direction. So here we see incremental change. So there's a change, we adjust. There's a further change, we adjust. But as time goes on, the environment will change in a faster pace, which creates a bigger gap between our strategic directions, our plans, and the environment. So in this phase, strategic drift is happening. Okay. And then it would enter a phase where the organization and its leadership, its management realizes that the environment there's now a gap, there's now a drift, would try to make adjustments, try to respond, and try its best to meet the new environment. And yet, very often, the gap continues to widen. So, it will reach a point when the organization will have to decide. It will have to be able to create a change, shift strategies, shift directions in order to meet the environmental change. Otherwise, there's this arrow here going down. Otherwise, actually in other graphs, it will show here an icon of kamatayan. It is either change, adapt, evolve, or die. The classic examples are, for example, Kodak. My generation, the generation of Doris, we grew up in the film generation, no? When cameras had film. So you had to make sure that you had enough film cartridges in order to last you your whole trip, for example. Kodak was the leader. What happened to Kodak now? In the Visayas and Mindanao, we still use the term Kodak, but as a verb, no, magpa-Kodak, no, to take pictures, to take photos of ourselves. It remains, but the youth, our students of today, generate the millennials and Generation Z, they don't even know what film in cameras it's all about. Everybody uses a digital form. And now it used to be digital cameras. Now it is mainly our mobile phones, digital format. Kodak failed to adjust to that change in environment. The shift from film, where they were the leaders, they were the world's top providers of film. They failed to read and adapt to the change to the digital world. And so they died. Kodak died. Another example is Nokia. It's a classic textbook example. When the mobile phone industry started, we had two main brands, Motorola and Nokia. And where are they now? They're not the major players. Now the major players are, of course, Samsung, Oppo, Huawei, Apple. What happened? Strategic drift. And eventually the failure to adapt to the new environment, which is the digital technology. So here we see that even as institutions, we have been already adapting in increments to the change in environment. I'm sure that 2, 3 years, 4 years ago, we have started talking about distance education. We've started talking about lifelong learning, about MOOCs, about the shift to digital platforms. And some of us may have had plans to incorporate all this in our schools. But what happened is not just a drift. It's not just a drift, a strategic drift, a change of environment. What happened with COVID-19 is basically this. The environment, instead of changing in a smooth slope, the environment here in red changed drastically with the pandemic. The environment changed almost, in terms of graph form, perpendicularly. It went like this, even further if you think about it. And so where are we now in terms of our strategic plans? We know that our previous strategic plans are now very far from the present environment. And what happened here, we know is what we call a disruption, a major disruption. So we're going to discuss fiscal discipline in this context of disruption. When I first joined FSUU, it was Urias College then, I would say that it was a major challenge. The school was in a very difficult situation. Financially, the environment was very challenging. our liquidity was a bit tight. It was difficult and challenging, but on hindsight, it wasn't a disruption at the scale of this pandemic. And I'm sure that while our schools, we know that we went through the K to 12 transition, for example, and it wasn't easy for us. It's a good thing that government was able to respond with the senior high school vouchers, for example, but it wasn't easy. We had to redirect. We had to involve even then. But the scale of this pandemic is different. What happened really disrupted our operations, really caused a major shift in how we approach education. When the lockdown or a quarantine was declared in March, all of us had to rush. For us in FSUU, we were luckily we were in finals week, so we just had to finish finals, and our second sem was over. I know that for some schools, they were either in the last quarter of their term, their second semester, and it was difficult for many to finish that. So there was a lot of discussion on how to finish the term, how to deliver the outcomes and all that. It was a major disruption. Our enrollment, our school year was moved from June to August. Some of you have already started in July, but for us at FSUU, it's August, no? August 24. It allows us to do other things, but the implication financially of this disruption, for example, even in terms of paying our employees, is almost catastrophic. Okay? The shift, the disruption of COVID-19 disrupted our cash flows and therefore created another set of problems. So I know that for many schools, they have decided to close or to at least stop operations this year. And it is something that's very, very sad because many have built up the schools for many years despite the challenges and difficulties. And it took COVID to get them to say, we have to stop, at least for now. But it's disturbing. The statistics that are coming out of DepEd in terms of enrollment, if the figures are correct, more than 200,000 students at least are transferred so far from private schools to public schools. And for us in private education, that's a major difficulty. So now we find ourselves in difficult financial situations, some in more difficulty than others. But one thing is sure, disruption affected all schools, from the big universities to the mission schools in the regions. So COVID-19 is now forcing us in a way to take a second look and a third look and a fourth look at our finances. Are we still sustainable? Do we have enough money to go on? In fact, I'm sure that the decision to start classes as early, some I know started classes as early as June, some July. For many of those schools, the start of classes was informed by the need to get the cash flow going, the need to get the liquidity flowing, to have enough money. Earlier this morning, I was talking with our Director of Student Affairs, and she said that there are some schools here in Butuan, for example, that that already started enrollment, that already accepted full payment for tuition and fees, but have not even decided on which LMS, for example, if they're going online, to use. Why? Because there's a great need for cash for many schools. This next slide shows us that we're talking about financial discipline. We're talking about finances. We're talking about cash, precisely because, as Doris pointed out earlier, no money, no mission. Okay? So without finance, we know finance is the fuel for not just survival, but for success. Without money, we cannot implement our plans, no matter how beautiful they are. And so perhaps we should consider our plans now. In the face of this disruption, and if we look at our adjusted plans or our new plans in this time of the pandemic, the question should be, can our finances fund the activities or the plans that we have? I point this out because I know of several NGOs that continue on having strategic plans that are grand. You look at the plans, wow! But if you look at their revenue, the expected revenue, there's no way that these plans could be achieved. Not just the strategic plans, but also the operational plans for the year. It is important, and I emphasize this, that whatever plans we have, we need to make sure that we have enough funding to achieve these plans for this year, for this school year, and for the next school year especially. Now, our plans and therefore our funding will have to have a continuity. It cannot be disjointed. So please spend time reflecting on the directions our institutions are taking and looking at our finances, whether they are able to fund, to fuel these activities, these directions that we want our schools to take. This experience of the disruption, the COVID-19 disruption, points out to perhaps what for many would be, on hindsight, the importance of having savings. The schools that have savings would not have as difficult a time in this present context. They're better able to, for example, set up networks, set up what's needed to go fully online, for example, or if your context does not support an online delivery, perhaps if you're doing modules, if you're doing physical materials, you can still fund it if you have savings. Schools that have less savings or even no savings at all would have difficulty even paying their employees. If they're starting, for example, in August, they might be finding, or some of us will be in the situation where we're asking the question, how can we pay our employees at this point? Our teachers, our faculty, our staff. So on hindsight, we're realizing that savings is important. And savings can be achieved only if we are disciplined in our approach to finances. Okay, I'll discuss that more later. But this other important concept, we need, starting now, if we haven't started, if we're in a situation where we didn't have savings when COVID-19 happened, when the lockdown happened, when the current quarantine happened, It is important that we start thinking now to have the mindset of saving, perhaps starting small this school year, but still finding some room for savings and building up these savings. Meaning, we need to have a net income. Now, when we look at our revenues and we have our expenses, we need to program savings at the end of the school year. We cannot just end up with a zero or a balanced budget lang, zero, or a deficit. No, that's worse. So, of course, the next thing is, how do we get ourselves to have, hopefully, a leftover from our income, our revenue, after all the expenses of the school year? So that is, of course, the million peso question. But there are ways, there's a mindset that's needed in order to achieve this. And I will share more on that later. But the importance of savings. This next slide, I've been sharing the officers of FSUU know that I shared this in our leadership training last school year, and I've been sharing this with many groups. This concept of confronting the brutal facts comes from the book Good to Great by Jim Collins. It is one of his, for me, main points. What does this mean? Confront the brutal facts. First, in his book, Jim Collins tells the story of Admiral Stockdale. He became an admiral. He was a fighter pilot during the Vietnam War. He was shot down and he became a prisoner of war for 8 years. In what's called the Vietnam Hilton, if I'm not mistaken. And during those 8 years, he was tortured more than 20 times. So, Jim Collins, in explaining what confront the brutal facts means, tells the story of who became eventually an admiral, Commander Stockdale. He was the highest ranking officer of the United States military who was shot down and became a prisoner of war during the Vietnam War. And when he was eventually released after 8 years, when he was asked why he survived, he explained that because he never lost faith that he will be released from prison. One. But together with that firm belief that he will be successful, that he will survive, is coupled by the mindset of knowing his reality. He said that he had companions who, when they were at the prisoner of war camp, his fellow pilots, for example, and other soldiers, when they were in prison, they would say, "Oh, we would be released this Christmas. We will be home by Christmas. We will be back in the United States by Christmas." So Christmas came, and it did not happen. They were still in prison. So they said, "I will be released by Easter," and Easter would come, and they would still be in prison, and they would become depressed. So those who were in severe denial of this reality of their being in prison, one, and that the situation would be very difficult because they were being tortured, and that they didn't know when they would be released. Those who did not confront these brutal and cruel facts did not survive because they became discouraged. So when they had expectations as these were not met, and this happened time and again, they became discouraged and they lost their faith in survival. they lost the drive, the mindset needed to survive. Stockdale had a very different mindset. He knew what the situation was. He knew it would be difficult. He knew that no one knew when they would be released, how many years it would take them. And as I said, it took them 8 years, if you can imagine that, 8 years in prisoner of war camp. He accepted all this and started organizing and finding ways to help others survive. He devised a code for them to be able to communicate. He even devised a system so that knowing that people cannot survive torture indefinitely, even devise a way to say you can divulge certain facts at certain points while you're being tortured, realizing that this is the reality. But because he accepted the facts, he accepted his reality, their reality, knowing it would be difficult, and at the same time, having the firm belief that they would survive. He survived. And many others did survive with them. So he became the first aviator, pilot, to hold both aviator's wings and the Medal of Honor, the highest award for bravery in the United States. But this is what we can learn from this concept, from good to great. Confront the brutal facts. So our situation now, what is our brutal fact? What are the brutal facts financially? It is important then to have data. One of the first things we did when trying to plan to respond to this COVID-19 pandemic was survey our students. We knew that somehow we had to look at online delivery as an option. And in fact, we now are fully online in our delivery for summer and for the first semester. But how did we come up with the decision? It was driven heavily by facts, by data. The first thing we did was have a survey that can now be done over the FB even, over social media through Google Forms. And that's what we did. So we had the data. How many, for example, questions like how many would have devices, would have laptops, would have tablets in terms of our basic education, our college students. So we had a good picture of that. How many had good connectivity? How many would have difficulties? How many would have no connectivity at all? So we'd had a survey and more or less had a picture of all the data regarding these questions. And this drove our decision on what kind of LMS to engage. So eventually we decided on asynchronous delivery, fully online, but asynchronous, meaning our students could download the material for the week or for the day and then study offline, look at the videos offline, do the readings offline. So this was informed by our data, the reality of our clients, the students. So that's just one example. What's the other data? Enrollment. Can we maintain enrollment of last year? How many of our students, for example, will have difficulties because their parents who are in business are now out of business because of the COVID disruption? For example, in Butuan, many of our parents I know are in the catering business, and that business has taken a big hit. There are no more parties; it's not allowed. So, what are expectations in terms of our enrollment? We cannot just say, "Oh, the enrollment will increase," without basis, or we can maintain our enrollment. What's the basis for that? If we have that, some schools I know would have even perhaps bigger enrollment, and some would be able to maintain. But some would, I think, most of us would have a decrease. So how are we responding to that? What are our assumptions for our financial plan? What are our assumptions for our budget? What are our assumptions for our operational plan for the year? What adjustments do we need to have for our strategic plan? So again, what are the brutal facts? It's looking at the data and really looking at the data with eyes wide open, and do our analysis and our decisions based on that. But again, do not forget the other side, which is have faith that we will survive. Not just survive, but survive brilliantly. So fiscal discipline. Fiscal discipline is the ideal balance between revenue and expenses. This word fiscal discipline is applied more to government actually, but it is something that can really be applicable to our situation. Finding the ideal balance between revenue and expenses. As I said, for me, the ideal balance should include savings as a mindset. So you now say, but we're in now difficult times. Our revenues, we're not sure. And that's so true. All of us are affected. In terms of planning, for example, for the K to 12, before COVID, the K to 12 transitions, which we thought was a major disruption. Part of our response was to build our structures in such a way that we would have other income from rental spaces to help ensure that should we have issues in enrollment during the K to 12 transition, which we know would take 5 years, we had enough or some money to help augment our income, our other revenue. But what has happened now? Many of those who are leasing space from us for their businesses, we had to like give discounts, heavy discounts, for them to be able to survive, which is just right. So even our other income took a blow. So in our schools, in terms of our schools, we know are very dependent on, if not totally, we are mainly dependent on tuition. So what will happen to our tuition? And tuition, of course, is a function of enrollment. So what are our assumptions? What do we expect? 10% decrease, 15% decrease, 20% decrease? We need to look at the data. We need, if we can have a survey, even better, of how many are coming back, how many are not coming back. In basic ed, it's easier to do that. It's easier to get the data on how many will continue coming to school with us or not. But we base our budget then, our revenue assumptions and our expense assumptions on that. So again, COVID-19 has affected our revenue side. I know of some schools that during the April, May, June, they have found other ways to have other revenue, other income. Some of them, for example, started holding tutorial classes for April and May, for summer, so to say, and to help augment their income. Some of them, as I said, started early enrollment and asked parents to start paying so that they have enough cash flow. Some of them, as a response, some of us started already our school year in June or July, our first semester or school year, if we're a basic education institution. So there are ways to manage our revenue side, but we know that we are affected by the COVID pandemic. Some of our parents lost their businesses or have reduced income. So we have to be able to plan for that as well. There's a loan program by Land Bank, for example, offered at 3% interest with promissory notes of parents as collateral. Is that something that we could use in our situation right now? Well, it depends. Okay, but if you have savings and you have enough savings, you can use some of your savings to fund that. Okay? So that's from the revenue side. On the expense, in the expense side, now this is where we have more, in a sense, control. Of course, in a school, we know that from our tuition, 70% goes to salaries and benefits, 20% for operation, 10% you're supposed to set aside, and that could be your budget for savings, for example. But there are other ways of looking at our expenses and making sure that our budgets are at least balanced, meaning our revenues and our expenses do not exceed our revenues. And therefore, we look at when we look at the expense side, very often, of course, in terms of salaries and benefits, we have the losses. There's no diminution, unless, for example, your operations, your number of students decrease, and therefore, sadly, and I hope this doesn't happen to any of us, we need to let some of our staff go or faculty go. We hope to avoid that. But that's something that's almost non-negotiable, unless, as I said, we start retrenching. So what are the other expenses? How can we save on our other expenses? Our electricity, of course, because we don't have physical classes, there's less expense, for example, air conditioning, the classroom use, electric fans, etc. So there's some savings there. So what else? One thing I'd like to point out now is that very often, our mindsets are used to the patterns we have. While we know there's a disruption, our inertia makes us do the same things. I've heard situations or incidents where some schools have people who would still request for they're going fully online, but there will still be a request for chalk, for example, or whiteboard markers when there's no physical class, when their plan is to go fully online. But the one in charge of making requests still put chalk as a procurement priority, or whiteboard markers as a procurement priority. So we see the effects of inertia, or put it another way, some sort of blindness to new realities. So we need to look at this. I mean, take an effort to look at where we could reduce expenses. And very often we say there's no space for further reduction. And actually, there always is space for reduction. No? I say this from experience. In our own experience, as I mentioned before, Urius College then had some difficulty with finances. And one of the first things we did was balance the budget. And how did we do this eventually? It's a long story. We're running out of time. But we reordered the prioritization. We started with what is really essential: paying the faculty and staff, salaries and benefits. What else? Electricity. What else? Water. What else? Some other expenses. That's a must, no? Essential. What's left over, that's what we divide for other activities, and we build our plans based on what we have, what fuel we have. So our budget was balanced, but it necessitated a shift in mindset. We had to say, tighten our belts. We had to be disciplined. This is what Doris emphasized in her introduction. We have to have enough discipline to say, this now entails uh, discipline on our part. It entails a change in lifestyle. It entails, for example, in our case before, we had a culture of snacking. What do I mean? Every meeting, there's a snack. So if you had 3 meetings, you had 3 snacks in the morning and another 2 snacks in the afternoon. I'm exaggerating a bit. But how we handled this was, if you can only request for snacks if your meeting goes beyond 2 hours, and that's a long meeting, right? So only meetings of 2 hours will have snacks provided by the school. So that's how we saved. So it's a change in lifestyle, because we, being Filipinos, we love to eat, no? But we have to look at that, given our situation now. I have a friend, maybe he's watching now. He asked, sort of informal consultancy. He said, "Could you please look at our budget?" He was having sleepless nights because he couldn't balance the budget. He had a deficit, and the school year already started. And we're looking at it. And in short, I shared with him what we did. And he said, "Oh, that's very difficult. Ang hirap naman yang gawin." No? But I said, "But it's something that's necessary." And one area that I asked him to look at is, for example, teacher loading. No? Perhaps in the smaller schools, it's easier to monitor and see how teachers are loaded, our faculty are loaded. But in the bigger schools, there's a gap. No? Maybe some are underloaded. We're hiring more teachers than are actually needed. No? When for example, we have our minimum classes, let's say we have our maximum classes of 40, and there are 2 sections of 20 each, it could be 1 section fused into 1 section. So things like that. So in fact, that's what that particular school did. And in the end, to cut a long story short, they were able to realize huge savings from that school year. But seriously looking at the expenses from a lens of trying to save. Again, very often we are used to a lifestyle, we're used to, we have habits in terms of our systems. We need to have a shift in outlook. We need to have a paradigm shift, so to say, to look at our revenues and our expenses with a new set of lens. Because some of the expenses which we think are necessary are in fact non-essential. I remember some years ago, I was watching a TV show on personal finance, and a janitor was being interviewed. It was, in the course of the sharing of the one who was presenting. So the janitor told him, "I have very small income. I cannot realize savings because my expenses are all necessary." Then the person who was the finance expert started going through that particular person who was a janitor, his expenses. So ano ba to? Pagkain. Oh, ano yung pagkain mo? Ano yung binili? What do you buy? Oh, when my patent after work, I pass by Dunkin' Donuts and buy donuts or buy a cup of coffee. Oh, pwede bang di ka lang magkape? Umuwi ka lang sa inyo, doon ka magkape kasi mas mura. Things like that. So they started going through the expenses in a more detailed manner and with different lens. And by the end of the session, the janitor realized that he could start saving. This is a janitor. What are the essential expenses? No? We say, kailangan kong kumain. But sometimes what we spend for food, we could really save. We could bring baon, for example. When we buy rice here in Butuan, when we buy rice from the calf, it's 20 pesos per cup. And that's half a kilo of rice if you make baon. So things like that. Looking at our expenses with a new set of lens. So that's how we eventually balance our revenues and our expenses. Our situations, I know, are very different. Different schools, different situations. I emphasize this. But we need to look at the revenue side. What are our realities? How can we augment this revenue? On the other side, how do we look at our expenses? We need to look closely at our expenses, look at the details, because I am sure, no matter what our situation, there's a way to reduce expenses. We just need to realize that life has changed, and therefore our lifestyles need to change. In terms of revenue, I remember now, of course, FSUU, we're a Catholic school. We're part of SEAP. SEAP wrote us a letter, the executive director, Alan Avellano, wrote us a letter that they've been approached by a European firm saying that amongst many schools in the Philippines, our school was identified where our buildings are in a situation where towers for telecommunications can be built, for maybe later put cell sites and things like that. And it is, if you think about it, given the shift towards more the need for bandwidth, the need for faster internet, for example, towers by necessity to provide all this bandwidth and all these mobile signals are needed. So that's one area for us because of the location of our school. So, and many other ways, we may have we may have bought some land and it's idle. Maybe we can do something with the land. We can lease it out, or maybe just last week I was talking with somebody I just met who was very entrepreneurial. He was giving me the statistics for the possible income for kamote. Kamote, you plant kamote, you leave it, and it grows. And he was telling me it's astonishing, for 1 hectare, for example, he was saying you can try harvest kamote 3 times a year, and for that particular size, it could be, you could realize 1 million per harvest, for example. So for a small school, that's something. You might have land somewhere, or where you can do some agriculture, for example, to augment the income. There are different ways of augmenting the income based on your situation. So again, we all have different contexts. We all have different situations, but there's a way, and in fact, it's necessary for us to re-examine seriously with a different set of lens our revenues and our expenses. The key word, as Dory said, is discipline. We need the discipline to say, these are our revenues, these are our expenses, reduce the expenses, hopefully find ways to increase the revenue, and so have a balanced budget. Discipline is needed to achieve fiscal discipline. Discipline is needed, as I said, to achieve at least savings, which I emphasize this. Find a way somehow to have savings so that as we build up savings for the future, either for growth, for construction, equipment, more bandwidth, etc., when the situation asks for it, we are also able to in times of disruption, God forbid, another disruption in the future, we have enough fuel to weather the storm. Okay? Again, schools who have enough savings, they're having a less difficult time in this major disruption. This is a lesson we have learned. We say in hindsight, but it is important also going forward. So this is my last slide. So we have the cycle of disruption. I'm going to use it in a slightly different way. So we have the disruption of COVID. So now we have applied to fiscal discipline and finances. So it is a time now to rethink our directions, rethink how we can, our revenue side of the equation, and also rethink our expense side of the equation. Is this necessary? Is this essential? And after rethink, we move on to reimagine and to reinvent. These are, of course, very different, but it's a continuum. We rethink, we reimagine, we reinvent if need be. We're offering, for example, if we're doing, what can we offer this type of courses? Can we move to short courses? Can we start offering MOOCs, for example, and stuff like that? Now, following the session of Dr. Vea, what are our changes in our plans in terms of quality? We need to reimagine. And reimagining entails moving away from what we have now, going beyond. Use our imagination. Perhaps have an exercise in imagining. I also have to say that if our resources are stable, if our resources our financial resources are stable, it would leave us enough room to reimagine. We could better imagine. Because if we're worried about very basic things, then it's very difficult to do that. Rethinking, reimagining, reinventing. And if we are having difficulties right now, as many of us are, then we still need the discipline to rethink, reimagine, and even reinvent our institutions going forward. It has to be part of our plan and our directions. So, of course, this happens over time also. Look at things in terms of what we need to offer, maybe new directions to take, keeping the essentials and what is good from what we know, and then evolve, morph. I think one of the key words now is to be able to evolve, to adapt. Those who are able to evolve, like in the biological world, survive. Those who are not, cannot, as shown by the chart, or the slide on strategic drift, which is now very, very disrupted. So, and after that, we go back. When there's a disrupt again, I said I'm using this in a slightly different context given our topic of finance. But then the cycle begins again. So our situations are different, our contexts are different, but there are basic concepts that we have to have in mind. We have to confront the brutal facts. We have to find ways to build up savings, so that in the future, what we're experiencing now can be mitigated. Okay? We need to look at our revenues and expenses with a new set of lens. We need to be able to change lifestyles, change paradigms, and look at the directions that we take so that the fuel we have is enough to fund our dreams. Okay. So I'll end here so that there's enough time for our questions and answers, and so that we also have lunch earlier and not later. So again, thank you very much for your patience, and I hope that you learned something from this session. Thank you very much. Doris?
Yeah, We'll wait for you to stop sharing so that we can share the screen.
I'll stop share. I'll stop sharing.
Yeah. Thank you, Father Young, for that very, very valuable sharing. I like that. Now we really have to overcome our inertia, okay, because of COVID-19. We really have to rethink, reimagine, and reinvent. And a lot of our participants actually have very, very interesting questions. So I know you're so concerned about lunch, but that's just the two of us who cannot eat. They can actually eat, okay, even while we do Q&A. From one of your good friends, Monsignor Mike Veneracion. Do you have new revenue streams that will make use of the free spaces in the schools at this time?
As of the moment now, we don't have. Well, it will be an eventual revenue stream, hopefully, but a space actually which we set aside in our CBE, our newest campus, or part of the campus, we set aside for what was supposed to be a radio station. And now we have shifted to like a social media station of sorts, no? And so we're looking at this whole new area of social media, the use of FB, Twitter, and YouTube. We're just starting, but we're realizing certain things. Now we're able to use analytics from social media, for example, for our own decision making, and we have been looking at that. Of course, we know that we can also monetize certain aspects of for example, if you have viewership, no, in YouTube, you could monetize it, start monetizing it. So it's something that we've started to do. So that's a direction. So the space we set aside for a normal radio station, we're shifting to a social media platform, and eventually to them. Otherwise, the other thing I could really think of now is the offer of SEA for that tower, studying it. There are also offers in terms of solar energy to use our roofs for solar panels and all that. But still, we need to develop that aspect more. Our leases are still there. We have offered, maybe I could say this here, we have offered 50% discounts on their rents, no? For example, except for two that are banks. So, but it's something that certainly our revenue in that end decreased. But as to the other spaces we have in classrooms, etc., we haven't found use for that right now. What I can say also is we had a plan years ago. We haven't actualized it because of the ups and downs of the industry. But we were thinking of putting up a call center in one of the areas. Now we have the computers, for example. We have the bandwidth. It's not used at night. So we were studying that. But as we know, with COVID, the whole industry also shifted. So we're studying the situation now. But that's one area that you could perhaps go into if you have lots of space and you have lots of equipment that you won't be using.
Actually, Father, the small schools will just have classrooms, right? And the classrooms will be empty because the delivery is mostly distance, mostly, right? So if you will have a good proposition for that, please share it with us. No? A lot of our schools are small. They don't have your leasable space.
Yes. If
radio station.
The thing that comes to mind now is it of course won't apply to all schools, but if you won't be having, and we won't be having, as probably the case for face-to-face classes, there's actually a higher demand in some areas for bodega, for warehouses, so to say, and we know that the online business has been growing. Of course, some of it is food, but also for other stuff, right? Online selling and all that has been, online commerce have had an uptick. So maybe you can think of offering that as a rental, maybe at a preferred rates, no? That could be one direction. That's just from the top of my head, for example. So that could be an option, depending on where you are.
Thanks, Father Young, for those ideas. But we have another interesting question here from Pinky Castelo Capino. Our school was purposely established for the economically disadvantaged, the lower middle class. So how can we address the competing interest of fiscal discipline, having savings or realizing savings, no? And providing the best quality we can offer, best quality education we can offer? We
Okay.
all want to realize savings, but sometimes it's rather difficult because as your janitor story tells us, you might think all your expenses are essential.
Yeah. But yes, again, in that particular school, it's for the economically disadvantaged. So there are two things. So one is foundational concept to provide quality. It is my view that we need to build savings somehow, because if you don't provide for savings, I think it is impossible to talk about quality, because given for example, you need to repair things, no? If it's just a small repair, it can be from operations. But if it's a major repair, if your roof becomes damaged, if you have no savings, how do you do that, no? Or how do you build your collection? So try as much as possible to have some savings, despite it's not easy. I'm not saying all this. That's why it's a discipline. It's not easy. But always in your budget, provide for some savings. At the very least, the 10% of tuition fee increment, put aside for savings. Try to do that. Try to realize the savings. That's one. Because building up of savings is the only way for me to ensure quality. Having said that, the revenue side, if the school is established for the economically disadvantaged, and if it is providing a certain level of quality, no? And if you're already getting ESC support and all that, I was just talking to a friend yesterday afternoon, and it was a rather long conversation. He's based in Manila. And the point he was making was that actually it is very easy to sell education, asking funds for education. If one is able to present, this is our school, we're in this context, our students are of this economic profile, but they're able to do this. When they graduate, they move on to do this and do that. It's very easy to sell and convince people. Believe it or not, in this context of COVID, still there are people who can give and are willing to give. So that's one side. Go into marketing your product, so to say, and actively seeking out people who are willing to fund, scholars, no, put simply. Think of schemes where it's easier to help. It doesn't have to be one scholar. It can be 5 persons to 1 scholar, for example. 5 persons. So there's a way of doing this, setting up the system so that you can continue operating. So that's from the revenue side. But it's true, it's not easy. You have to balance all this. But again, unless we're able to realize some savings for the improvement of the school in the future, to be able to do certain things in the future, it might be difficult. One thing that I did not cover anymore is, of course, leveraging, being able to use loans. But that's very touchy. You have to be able to study your financial situation more closely. I have, in certain contexts, advised against taking out loans because of the risks. And my advice was not followed. And so some schools are having very great difficulties now paying the loans in this context, much as pay their faculty. So we have to be very careful with these things. look at the data, confront the brutal facts.
Very good answer. But some follow-up questions. So far, it's very clear. No, saving should be part of the mindset of quality, right? It's not as if there's a disconnect. No, it's not part of the competing interest because bottom line is quality. Therefore, savings will have to be part of what you should be planning, not to sustain quality. But yes, I was supposed to ask that question about loans because right now, because of the COVID experience, a lot of banks are actually poised to offer loans, especially to the GASPE participating schools, because there is an assurance that government will pay. It's just that there's some delay in the releases of the funds. Therefore, it's like a cash. It's like a, what do you call that? Like before the funds are released, then because there are cash flow concerns, the bank can step in to get loans.
Gap financing of sorts.
What's your advice on this? Of course, you said that you're not exactly in agreement. But what can the school do in terms of evaluating whether they will find this eventually working to their advantage?
In the end, we know that GASPE, it's assured. Now, if you have the slots, it's assured. So sometimes it's delayed, right? So the important thing now is, therefore, the main consideration is, of course, you need the cash to pay your teachers. Many schools are in that situation. You need the GASPE funding to be able to pay for your operations, especially salaries. So the thing to consider now is, can you pay the interest? No, like for that land back offer, it's 3% per annum. I don't know the details. If you're able to pay at which point now will it stop already? For example, does the loan have to be for 1 year, or could it be until you needed some sort of credit line type? I'm not sure. But the primary consideration would be, can you pay the interest? No, of course, can you pay the principal? You might be spending and doing other things with the money, and in the end, when the voucher comes, you cannot pay, right? So depends on the financial situation, but the primary consideration is, would you be able to pay the amortization when it comes to that? Or better still, can you pay the loan when the GASPE amount, the grant comes in? And can you pay the interest? So it's 3%. The land bank is 3%. Rates are falling. I don't know. Look at the other possibilities for that. No, but that's what we need to consider. Again, look at the data.
Thank you, Father. This one, another question. I think a lot of schools share this concern. From Millie Claro from University of Asia and the Pacific, and formerly my friend, formerly from St. Scholastica's Manila. Have you had uncollected tuition past school year? I think uncollected tuition.
Us?
Uncollected tuition. So how do you deal with this uncollected tuition?
We do have collectibles now, receivables. What we do in our budget is, actually, this is one approach. We actually build into our budget uncollected tuition. So we make assumptions. No, this amount of the gross receivables in terms of tuition, this certain amount, we assume to be not collected and eventually becomes bad debt. So that's what we do. We have other measures, like if they do finish, we don't release their credentials. The usual, no? We don't release the credentials until they are fully paid. We've even tried sending collection statements, no? Billing statements and all that. But it is a reality. Some of our students in our context here in Butuan, some of our students just drop off. They don't file a leave of absence. They just disappear. So they enroll, so that becomes gross receivable in our books, and they just disappear. Of course, that becomes bad debt eventually. But for the year's accounts, it is uncollected. So, but we know that that's gone now. They just disappear. We don't even know how to reach them and all that. So we need to, the way we manage is we build that into our budget. We make assumptions already.
Okay, that's a good answer. Now this time, for the entire sector now, Father, not just for individual schools. From Roel Crisostomo, this pandemic is considered the hard floor of our economy to include private school operations. Anyway, the question is this: how do private schools possibly rebound or survive if assisting schools is not among the top priorities of the government at the moment? I mean, we've heard of all of these supposedly amelioration programs, one-time cash assistance, and nothing has actually materialized. So how do private schools possibly rebound or survive? I mean, you did a rebound. You Urios College, right?
Yes, we did a rebound in a different context, but it wasn't a disruption as bad as this. But see, I mean, PEAC has invited me to share in remember that we went around the regions, Norris, right? And this was a broader topic, but also along school finances. Uh, uh, the regulatory stance of government has always been, I would say, detrimental in a way to private schools. It has always been, we're very regulated, and we have always been trying to advocate through our different associations, with the umbrella of COCOPEA, to advocate. I think one approach has to be, by necessity, presenting the case to our to Congress, and to the senators. As we know, Doris, there are lawmakers that are very friendly to us and would understand the situation once we present the how things are. Of course, on the other hand, we have to realize that it's a complex issue, but government has many pressures right now. No, it is basically just trying to fund the different concerns of this pandemic. No, so we have other more, let's say, health-related priorities, testing and all that. There's all this clamor. So what we need to do, as I think, as private schools, is what is within our control. What is within our control? Our expenses, it's within our control. The direction we take, that's within our control. We try to do as best as we can in terms of this. The next level would be our association. So we need to put together rational and doable proposal. Of course, if we go to Congress and say we want all the money equivalent to DepEd budget, that won't happen, no? But we need to present to them a reasonable and doable proposal. First, make them realize what's in the Constitution. Father Joel Tabora would always stress complementarity, that private schools have a very, very important role to play. Many of our lawmakers, they're private school educated, and they understand why. Okay. The innovation comes from the private schools and all that. So it's important, it's critical for the Philippines that the private schools continue being a partner in educating our youth. We need to convince our lawmakers of this, and then have a doable, reasonable, concrete proposal. And I know that there are already initiatives, and I know that Doris is also part of that initiative and critical to that. But
with you, okay.
That's what
we need to do. Dr. Johnny and Sister Marisa, yes, Father. But that's right. Before the lockdown, we actually were in discussions with Senator Win Gatchalian on a framework of operationalizing complementarity. That will have to be pursued. But you're correct. In fact, I want to take it one step further. No, I think in 2022 we should go back to an education agenda for whoever is running for the presidency. I remember that in the past, and we said that we needed an education president because with COVID happening after the results of the PISA, right? Where are we right now in the Philippines, no? In terms of the quality of education that we are delivering to our learners? So I think those are all the questions we have. A lot of are actually thank yous to you. May we have a copy of your slides so that we can upload? Okay.
No PDF, just the slides.
And also, of course, this video will be viewable. The first 17,000 who viewed it this morning, okay, will be the first 17,000. We'll have more in the days to come. So thank you, Father Young, for your time. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for being
Thank you very
regional
much.
program director. And I just found out your term as president has been extended again.
Yeah. I'll grow old here.
Okay.
No.
Okay,
A few more years, couple more years.
Couple more years. Okay, so let's see what more reinvention you will do as president.
I have a good team, so
Okay,
I have a
thank
very
you,
good
Father.
team.
Thank you for wearing the PA shirt. Show the logo again. There.
Proud
Okay.
RPD.
RPB. Good afternoon again to all our viewers, all those who were with us in the webinar. Thank you, Father Yang. And magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Bukas po, magkita-kita ulit tayo. We have Brother Armin Luistro and Father Jun Viray to talk about educating the conscience. So we've already done our what we should today, no? Standards and finance. So tomorrow, let's talk about our our role in educating the consciences of our learners, our teachers, and even our own conscience, right? So magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Enjoy your lunch and see you tomorrow. Okay.